Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Mike. Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about what it takes to become a great leader and build a great team. And today I'm excited to have a conversation with a tech CEO straight from Silicon Valley. Now, I don't have these opportunities a lot because I'm not known as the tech guy, but this is going to be an awesome conversation. Her world is AI, and she's part of driving the future of business in a really interesting and compelling way. She has a social mission as well and is passionate about the ethical creation and use of AI. So this is going to be awesome. We're going to be talking about leadership, and I'd like to get into some of the nuances of leading really smart people doing cutting edge work in that technology frontier. So for all of my listeners who tune in specifically for these in-depth conversations about leadership best practices, settle in, get comfortable, and get ready for some really valuable takeaways. My guest today is Wendy Gonzalez. She is the CEO of Sama, the mission-driven provider of accurate artificial intelligence data for 25% of Fortune 500 companies. As CEO, Wendy closed the largest round of financing for a woman-led AI infrastructure company. And that's really impressive in and of itself. We could stop there. But she's led this company to recognition on the Forbes AI 50 list and has been on the Inc. 5000 list for, I think, 2 years. Today, Wendy and her team of data experts continue to transform the artificial intelligence industry through high-quality training data and the removal of dangerous biases from ML algorithms. So, Wendy, welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wendy, I've got so many questions for you, but I think we should probably ground ourselves a bit at the starting point with just your story. Not everyone rises to become the CEO of a AI company. So there was probably some steps along the way, and your journey is fascinating. I know a little bit of the backstory, but tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are and why you're so passionate about the business you're in.
Uh, I started off my career actually as an auditor.
Wow,
I
that's exciting.
graduated school with an accounting and information systems degree, and I joined Ernst and Young. And I thought, okay, this will be fun. Get a chance to see the world. Meet some different clients. And I found about 2 months into it that I was not cut out to do accounting and to be an auditor. So I luckily had the opportunity to transition into management consulting. It seemed like a much better fit, which is really how do you work with clients to figure out how to deploy, transformational technology to make their businesses more effective, more performant, you name it. So that was really the thing that launched me was in my career in technology was, and I ended up spending about 10 years there, really working with, some of the world's largest companies to figure out how they can leverage technology. So in that space, it was fantastic to really be sort of on the leading edge of technology adoption. But it kind of wasn't good enough from there. I love working with clients, but I really wanted ownership. I was like, okay, great, we're helping these clients, successfully change their businesses or transform them. But what if I want to be on the, kind of the receiving end? I want to carry that forward. So I switched over and worked at a couple of public companies in IT leadership roles where I kind of became the client, which is really neat to drive forward technology decisions and what my companies were deploying. But I kept wanting to get smaller. It's like, how can I have more impact? How can I have more kind of agency and ownership? So I got to the point to where if I kept moving to smaller companies, I was like, why don't I just build one? So I had a former colleague of mine co-founded an Internet of Things SaaS startup, and that was amazing. We had some great traction. It was fun building a product from grounds up. That we really felt could help transform the way, companies manage, intelligent devices. But somewhere along the way, I had a few kids So I had 3 kids and, started to talk to my husband about just, we've got these little people. We live in this, bubble of the Silicon Valley. How do we get involved in the community? How do we really start to kind of showcase our values, and give back basically? And we found it to be really hard, to do that work part time. So started thinking more and more about, is there a way that I could combine a combination of this passion for technology and really affecting change with something that kind of actually contributes to the world and society? And long story short is, I was contemplating it, and then my, father unexpectedly passed away,
Mm.
and so, that happened as a surprise, and so, I kinda looked in the mirror and said, "What am I waiting for? Like, why?" Life is basically too short not to do something that you're extremely passionate about, so I actually chose to leave the, uh, startup I co-founded, especially right as we were starting to see some success, to do something that felt, radical at the time, but I was so happy I did it. I changed, completely, switched positions and joined a nonprofit that I felt really reflected values, that were really about, creating opportunity, financial independence, but, was a technology company. So I figured, hey, maybe I can actually be helpful here and bring my passion, understanding how to deploy technologies and really advanced technology in enterprises to, a company that also had a social mission.
So when most of us think about AI and its potential, we watch the business news and all the big companies doing really cool things and their stock prices are bolting up and then they're coming back. From an insider's perspective, what do you think we as society, because I know you're very mission driven, what should we be really concerned about when it comes to AI? What do you want the average Joe to be aware of when it comes to this is our future, but we need to be careful?
Yeah, there are a number of things, but I think first and foremost is that, we are in sort of a place where generative AI, right? So Gen AI, I'm sure, when you think of, Llama or Google Bard or Chat GPT, people are familiar with those different applications. It's really a generational technology. And what I mean by that, it is probably going to be as transformative as the web was in terms of
Wow.
changing the way that people do business, driving increased productivity. And because this technology is so impactful, the other component of this is that it's kind of been democratized, meaning we now can deploy AI with lower code solutions, which means it's easier to deploy, which means it's going to be more pervasive, eventually more ubiquitous. So the reason why this is critical is that the average, whether it's consumer or person in business, needs to understand how's this going to affect the way that you do your work. Um, are you sharing your data unintentionally, right? How do you know that those AI models that could literally be embedded in, like, your devices, your internet search engines, how do we know that they're working and are trustworthy? Right. So the key thing is that I think us as individuals need to ensure that the AI that's being deployed, since it's becoming so pervasive, has been developed in a way that is responsible and trustworthy, meaning making sure people are aware that they're not, unknowingly giving away their data. That the models that are being built, if they make their way into financial systems, how do we ensure that there's not bias that's built in that might, affect a certain demographic or person who is trying to do the lending? How do you ensure if it's being leveraged for security, right? That there's not bias in that. So I think these are the things that are really critical to consider when either adopting, or making decisions on how you leverage AI in your company.
And how is your company addressing some of those issues? I know in our brief before going on air, our little meeting we had before we jumped on the podcast, you talked about bias and addressing that through the work that you're currently doing. How exactly do you do that?
Yeah, so there are some frameworks, Mike, now that I think and best practices that are being built, and so when I describe responsible AI is actually a way in which you're developing your artificial intelligence. So it really is sort of anchored on a few things. Number one is all AI is built off of data. Okay. So it truly is this notion of a garbage in, garbage out. So the
Right.
pillar of this is data governance. Where'd your data come from? Is it a representative set of data? Because the example I used in terms of bias, imagine, if you're building a financial lending system and you're using existing data and you find that women and people of color don't often get loans. Your model could infer, oh, that these folks aren't qualified, right? So like
Right.
it's really about, hey, how do you ensure that there's, you have the right data sets and there's bias free as possible, or you have the right data sets to ensure the model is meeting the needs of the application. Okay, so that's a huge one. And where did the data come from? Did you have permission to use it? Another component of that is quality management. So the world changes, right? Every time you deploy an AI model out in the wild, there'll be more data that's pulled together. So how do you ensure that that model stays performant and is performing accurately? Three is how do you have some level of human insight or validation into it? Because with generative AI, you literally have AI models that are creating new content. And you might have heard of a term called hallucinations, right? When you can, a chatbot who gets tricked or, into selling a truck for $1 or, saying, crazy things, right? That's all hallucinations to where the model has been trained, but it's putting together data. It's coming out with an answer that's just factually wrong, dangerous, or otherwise. And so you need a human validation. And then last but not least, it needs to be explainable. If you don't know how the model's been built and what the outcome is, then the chances of kind of something happening in that black box and not exposing it for, ensuring that, you know, the model is kind of explainable and clear. That's the last tenet of responsible AI.
Wendy, clearly it takes a lot of smart people to do those things. And so you undoubtedly have a bunch of smart people on your team. And we all have leadership challenges. And one company may be in the consumables industry, somebody else may be leading in a fashion space, you lead in the technology space. I want to dig in a little bit and try to understand what it takes to be an effective leader in your world, working with really smart people on the cutting edge of technology. And you do some things pretty consistently that have helped elevate your own leadership effectiveness. And so I'd like to explore some of those with you if you don't mind. For example, you have this practice of, and I thought this was really interesting when I saw this note. You have a practice of firing yourself every year to see whether you ought to hire yourself back. Tell us about that. That seems really interesting to me.
Yeah, it is a great mental exercise to go through. And it's basically for the purpose of saying it's not just am I the leader we need today, but am I the leader that the company needs me to be in the next year, right? So if we're constantly sort of judging ourselves on, okay, well, things seem to be going pretty well, but really, it's not, the company doesn't need me to be the leader I was yesterday. They need me to be the leader the company is going to evolve to. So it's a very good exercise of saying, hey, what are the needs of the company? What is the outlook? And can I adapt to those needs and still be the leader that the company deserves? So that is a question I'm asking myself constantly is not, am I good enough today? It's really, am I good enough to be what the company needs me to be in a year?
So you're kind of at the top of the food chain, so to speak, there at your current company. You're the CEO. How would that advice apply to someone who's in the middle of the pack, a middle manager who's thinking, who wants to get promoted, wants to grow their career, wants to do bigger things? How could they ask and answer some of those questions within a hierarchical context where they're not on the top of the food chain?
No, I mean, I think that it's actually a concept or an exercise I've taken at different levels of the organization, and maybe I wouldn't put it as directly as hey, fire yourselves and rehire yourselves, but the concept is still the same, which is where is the company going, right? So you could be, a middle level manager, and maybe your objective is to, get to a certain set of metrics. Well, if we keep just trying to focus on where we are today, as opposed to taking a step back and saying, what are the other factors that are driving, the success of the company? So it's really about taking a moment to zoom out to say, not what are the problems just of today, but where do we anticipate they need to be tomorrow? So how can I adjust or build my skills? What are the things that the company needs to focus on? So maybe, last year it was all about growth. Hey, we need to drive revenue growth, and this is the most important thing. But we think about this, it's moving towards profitability. So how can I orient? Well, what does that mean? I have a different set of competencies, a different way I need to manage or lead to address those future objectives. So I think otherwise, we tend to get into kind of a reactive state, which is, all right, this the stuff, the problems I'm dealing with today. We're not thinking about how the business and the business environment evolves.
I
So
would
yeah,
imagine.
it's applicable.
I would imagine, as you're looking ahead to the future and what the business needs, it would be valuable to do this collaboratively in community with your manager, with colleagues who can help you discern where the business is going. It doesn't sound like an exercise to be done in isolation, in other words.
Yeah, for I think that's a great point, and one that I would sort of tie back into kind of a more practical example. So I think the one thing that we have as managers is that our goal should always be to hire people that are smarter than us.
Right.
Always, 100%. I haven't been the smartest person in the room a long time. Maybe if ever, I don't know. But I think that's really the idea. And as managers and leaders, to kind of tie back into your point, is that to really unleash the potential of our team members, it's not about saying, here's let me be fastidious and tell you exactly the 12 things that we need to focus on. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's to present a problem and a framework and say, hey, this is the, direction, right? Or the hypothesis that the company has, the direction that we're going. How can I engage your super smart brains to figure out how we achieve this? So I find that this kind of an exercise of where are we going in the strategy and the leadership is really about presenting a framework, selling and, engaging in that bit to say, hey, this is why we have this hypothesis, but to try to be prescriptive about what exactly it is we need to do to get there, right? It completely misses the point of the incredibly intelligent people that we have on our teams. So I find that from a leadership perspective, one of the most critical things, whether you are at the top or in the middle on your way there to the top, is how do you harness that from your team, and the leader, they can articulate a direction, a higher level strategy, but then really turn it over to get the better ideas to challenge to get challenged from their teams is the best possible solution. And that's in particularly important in technology, where you've got these brilliant, engineers who you're going to get so much more out of this process if they are part of the decision making journey. If you just want to dictate it and say, hey, just follow this 12-step, kind of paint by numbers, well, then you're not necessarily leveraging, the value of your teams. And you won't get nearly as much either engagement or ownership of what that strategy is.
And I would imagine it's really likely for those people who are being treated like that to go somewhere where they're treated differently, where they do feel like they have a sense of agency and contribute and they're valued and they can do their thing in an environment where their thing is really valued. So it sounds kind of self-defeating in a number of ways to be very prescriptive in that environment. So what as you're talking, and I love that confession. I haven't been the smartest
I
person in
think
the room for a number of years, and boy, nor have I ever, I think, been the smartest person in the room. But that brings this spirit of authenticity in my view. The sense of humility, the sense of authenticity. Hey, this is what we're trying to do, and I need us all to work together to get there. How important is, and you use this great term, I need to be my authentic self, not the idealized pearl wearing version of myself. Now, I wouldn't use the pearl wearing version to describe me. I've never worn pearls, but how does it apply from your perspective?
I think authenticity is everything. People are smart. They're really, really, really smart. And when you treat people with both trust and transparency, say, hey, these are the things we've got figured out. These are the things we need help on. The engagement just soars. I mean, you could say, I got it all figured out, right? To be that pearl wearing self, like this is the perfect plan. Go out there, let's get them. But at the end of the day, and especially as you move, I think, sort of up in levels from whether it's middle management to executive, is that you aren't necessarily the one who's doing the deliverables every day, right? Your team is. And so getting engagement and that ownership of, yeah, I'm totally behind this. Like I was part of this. I was there for the journey. And I think that's particularly important again with really smart technical people. They've got to believe in the outcome beyond that. If they're there as part of that journey and have the context, their ability to execute on those goals, is so much higher, right? Like we hire these smart people because of their creativity and the intelligence. As soon as you assume that they don't or won't don't know better and that they need to take 100% guidance from you, it's challenging. So there's that fine balance, right? Is that we're not going to get very far if you just kind of throw spaghetti against a wall and say, hey, this is, true blue sky. In some cases there are good, there's an appropriate time and place for that. But a lot of times it's about understanding, setting in that direction, and then teams being able to come together to both own and drive that strategy, and certainly the execution of that forward.
When you talk about having a number of really brilliant people in the room, there's going to be differences of opinion. And one of the things I often speak about and write about is the need for teams, for healthy teams to have healthy opposition, to make it safe so that people can express diverse and divergent views that aren't aligned with the boss's view all the time. Do so respectfully, but do so in a way that allows for robust conversation, debate, vigorous debate, for the purpose of moving us to a better place. So I'd be curious to know from your perspective, how do you as a boss in this environment, I assume, by the way, you agree with that statement, if not, push back, but how do you as a boss in that environment really get people to say what they think, offer different perspectives, and not just nod and smile at what you as the boss has said?
Yeah, that's a really good one. And what we have done, there's some great books out there as well, but we leverage an approach. One of the approaches from the table group. And there really, I think, are some great learnings that we found in terms of deploying that. I think first off is one is build trust. You have to build trust among your team members for people to feel comfortable voicing their opinions, right? So there are tons of exercises, and I have some fun ones that I love to use that are basically ways when you're building or building teams or helping to get to know each other to actually, have that trust. Because I think the example is a great one, right? If somebody cuts you off in the middle of the street, right? You could get into road rage. You're like, geez, look at that person. They're doing, a terrible, like, look, they're a terrible driver. But if it was your like grandma or your neighbor, you'd be like, oh, maybe there was a cat that was walking or, across the street or they were stopping for some important reason. Give people the benefit of the doubt, right? And so building trust, I think, is an incredibly important part to actually get those opinions. So one is build trust, to know where people are coming from. The second is what we call like sort of mining for conflict. So how do you make sure that when you're having that conversation, if you're an aware enough facilitator, that you're just double clicking to encourage and support differing opinions? Because if you as a facilitator or a manager are like, well, that's a terrible idea, and shut somebody down, the likelihood that you're going to be able to get those diverse opinions is pretty low. So create an environment of trust and then actually facilitate it and recognize it when there is good, healthy debate, call it out as a positive.
And I would add to your list, always maintain positive regard for the people there making contributions, trying to see them through the lens of positive intent. Because I think when we're working with a high performing, high level team, everyone wants to do great work. they just value different approaches sometimes, and we need to hear about those different approaches to really mine the value from them. So, blind spots. All leaders have blind spots. So I'm curious about how you as a leader have been very intentional about trying to recognize your blind spots and then responding appropriately.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think that self-awareness is a huge is hugely important because we're all going to be good at some things, maybe not so good at others. So that's definitely been a very intentional part of my approach at every kind of level I've been at or promoted to, which is, hey, what am I good at? Maybe what am I not so good at? And how do I basically either surround myself with people that will help kind of balance out those things that I'm not as strong at. So, in my current role, I absolutely look at the makeup of our team, the different strengths and weaknesses that come into the team, what people are good at, so that we can have as well balanced team as possible. Like, as an example, I am not a software engineer by trade. So, how do I then, leverage my experience in figuring out ROI and applications and management and recognizing that I need a strong CTO
Mm.
because that technical vision is something that's critical. So I think that's one thing, as I'd say, being aware of your blind spots so that you can and bring in complementary skills or practices that help there. Um, I have an operator background as an example, and so I make a specific approach in my current role to make sure I don't get too many details. Because if I do, I will naturally veer into let's needle into each of these individual numbers. So when the exercise I'm going through is actually pulling that information up so that we keep the conversation strategic and focused. And then certainly a practical one, last but not least, is 360s. Get feedback, be open to that feedback. It doesn't mean that, everything you get is something that you need to deploy immediately, but I think it's very important to get that 360 feedback. And then, there are a million different sort of, insights and other, kind of tools that can be used to get to better understand, your own leadership tendencies. But I think at the most basic, there are great practices out there, and getting the simple 360 feedback is huge.
Wendy, my listeners know that when we get near the end of the conversation, I ask my famous final question, and I'll ask it of you today, and that is, can you give my listeners one thing that they can take away from this conversation and begin applying immediately? It's great to talk about leadership, but it's better to take what we've learned and do leadership better. So what's one thing that they can take away from our conversation today?
Well, I would say keep listening to Dr. Mike.
Hey, I
But
love that one.
and all besides buttering you up, besides that though, is that yeah, I mean, learning and listening from others is key at every step in my career evolution. Uh, I had never been a CEO before, 5 years ago, right? So in every step, it's always about reaching out to learn from others, right? See what you can pick up, whether it's from this podcast, reaching out to your networks, to understand, hey, I've not done this before, or hey, there's a problem I'm seeing, and getting that feedback is incredibly valuable because you know what, it at least gives you perspective on where you are, and gives you an opportunity to learn from people who've made plenty of mistakes before. So anytime I can, if somebody calls, you'd be surprised. Almost everybody's willing to pick up that phone and answer. And resources and like this podcast are also great. A great tool to use.
Well, Wendy, you've been a great guest on the Mission First People Always podcast. We've been chatting with Wendy Gonzalez, who is the CEO of Sama. You can see all of her social platform places and the company website here in the show notes. I'd encourage you to go to her company website, check it out, maybe start following her on some of the social platforms and get to know what she's doing because she's doing really important work that's going to affect us in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. She's doing it today. So I hope you've gotten something from today's conversation. I really appreciate Wendy's wisdom and her willingness to share that with us. So until next time, uh, be good to your people, be humble, be open to hearing from them, and be open to learning from others, from peers and people who have walked the path before you, because that's how we all get better. So until we meet again, be a great leader and a great teammate. God bless.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a strong, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.